Hey everybody, Patton here, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about the new controller by 8BitDo, the N30 2.4G wireless controller for the NES or SNES Classic system. This controller just came out August 20th. It retails for about $24.99. So what comes in the box when you order the N30 2.4G controller? Patton, what do we got? Thanks, Patton. Hey everybody, so let's find out what is included with the 8BitDo N30 2.4G controller for the NES Classic. Alright, so let's open this baby up and see what's inside. So we're greeted by this plastic packaging. We have the controller and the retro receiver. Let's take a look. So the retro receiver this time is sporting a nice gray finish. We have the light right here on the end indicating if the receiver is in use or not. It'll be a nice blue color when plugged into the system. Once again, we have the design along the receiver here to simulate the Nintendo. If we dig deeper, here are our instructions and our charging cable. This is your standard micro USB to USB cord. It is gray in color to match the rest of the controller. It is a nice length, you can see here, and that cord will plug into the top of the controller in this port. The instructions give you a layout of the controller, how to connect it, the different status indicator for the battery life, and it lets you know that the sleep mode will activate within 15 minutes of no use. Very nice. So according to the instructions, if the LED is red in color, that is low battery mode. If it is green in color, it means that the battery is charging, and once the LED turns off, it means the battery is fully charged. You should be able to get 25 hours of playtime using the controller, and it will recharge within 60 minutes. As for the controller itself, it has the directional pad, the B, A buttons, select and start, charging port at the top. There are no power buttons to this controller. It is not Bluetooth. Once you plug in the retro receiver to your NES Classic, you turn it on. All you have to do is hit the start button and it will power on. New features to this controller are the B and A turbo buttons as well as the home button. The turbo functions function as if you are hitting the keys rapidly, very rapidly. Just a quick note for the emulator users, those two turbo buttons do not work as two extra buttons. They will only work as turbo buttons for the B and A button. So if you thought you were getting 4 buttons with this controller, you thought wrong. And then the home button, when pressed, will take you back to the home screen on the NES or SNES Classic. So that is everything you get in the box with this controller. Excellent, thank you. So how does this controller compare to the original Classic controller that comes with the NES Classic? We're going to find out right now with our hardware specialist. Patton, what can you tell us about the comparisons between these two controllers? Hey guys, I'm here to show you the comparison between the 8BitDo N30 controller and the original Classic controller. So how do these two controllers compare to one another? Before we get into that, I want to compare the retro receivers. I previously purchased the FC30 controller, which is a Bluetooth controller also by 8BitDo. Now their retro receiver, similar design, a little bit darker than the N30 receiver. Everything looks about the same, except you can see here, FC30 receiver, since that is a Bluetooth controller, has a port on the side for updating the firmware of the receiver itself. And again, it has the pairing button and the light indicator. N30 doesn't have any of this, so that means that you cannot update the firmware on this receiver, and it is solely meant to be used on the NES or SNES Classic systems. The last thing about this receiver I do want to talk about is how it compares to the Classic controller's controller port. You can see here, you don't have the buttons on the side to release the controller from the system, and if you take a closer look, it's because the retro receiver doesn't have those little tags to keep the controller plugged into the system. And this was really the only downside to the retro receiver that I found. When you're plugging the Classic controller into the system, you get a nice click, and when you pull on it, you know that sucker's not going anywhere. You have to hit those buttons to release it out. For the retro receiver, it just kind of slides in easy with no click, and you can slide it out very easily as well. It comes right out. And that's not really going to be an issue since you should be keeping this plugged into your Classic system the whole time. As for the controllers themselves, obviously you have the 2 added turbo buttons and the home button. You'll notice the colors are a little bit different and the graphics are different. The gray on the N30 has a little bit more of a yellowish tint to it than the original gray on the NES Classic controller. It's a little difficult to see here, but you'll notice that the buttons actually stick out a little bit further on the N30 than the original NES Classic controller as well. As for the feel of the buttons, they both feel pretty much exactly the same. The N30 has a little bit more clack when you push the buttons. Start and select feel exactly the same. The D-pad, in my opinion, feels just a little bit stiffer than the classic controller. And once again, there's a little bit more noise when you push the directional pad. And that could just be because the directional pad and the buttons stick out a little bit further than the classic controller. Also, you'll notice that the font is different for the BA, select, and start buttons. The weight of the controllers feels pretty similar. It's kind of hard to gauge that since the classic controller has a cord attached to it, but this controller is extremely light. It is very light. The biggest difference I noticed between the two controllers, obviously, with the addition of these two turbo buttons, is when I first go to grab the controller, sometimes you'll feel them right away, and you may think that you're playing with the turbo buttons rather than the A and B buttons, because I don't look at the controller when I grab it because I've used it so long. I've become very familiar with the buttons, so when I grab it and I feel all these extra buttons, it just kind of put me out there a little bit. But it's not a huge deal. You'll figure it out after playing with it for a few minutes. I wouldn't say the turbo buttons get in the way, but you definitely notice they're there after playing a couple times. Awesome. Thank you so much, Patton. You're looking great. So with this being a wireless controller, let's find out how it performs. Our performance specialist, Patton, is going to have all the details for us. Patton, what'd you find out? Hey everybody, I'm going to talk a little bit about the performance of the 8BitDo N30 2.4G controller with you guys. So performance-wise, this controller actually works really well. We're going to test it out with Castlevania real quick. And if we can get past this first stage, we should have no issues with it at all. So we're going to take out a few zombies here. Get some items from the candles. Now it may look like there's a little bit of input lag between the button presses and the actions on the screen, but that is just a result of playing these games through high definition. Let's see if we're able to do this skip. No problem. Now onto the first boss fight. We want to make sure that we have the axe, because we got an angry bat up there that's going to come at us. Since he's above us, the axe is the perfect weapon for this. And he is giving us no issues. Took him out no problem. Controller worked just fine. Let's check out the home button real quick. One quick push. And we are back to the main menu. So just to show you guys how great the latency is on this thing, I started up Super Mario Bros. 3 and we're going to have the two-player mode. Now player 1 is going to be the N30 controller and player 2 is going to be the original classic controller. So right here, now check this out. Exactly the same as the classic controller, hitting the buttons exactly the same. They're both jumping in unison, together as a team. True Mario Brothers fashion. No delay at all between either controller. So how about that turbo function? We're going to take a look at Gradius real quick. This is a good game to use as an example. So normally, you got your little pea shooter. If you hold it down, you know, 1 or 2 shots come out. Using this turbo button though, oh, here we go, perfect. The game suddenly became much easier, and it's a lot easier on your thumbs as well. How about Metroid? That's a hard game. Not anymore with the turbo button. A lot of great stuff there. So it seems like the audience that would benefit most from this controller would be those who just want to play the NES games on their systems, or for the emulation side, you have your NES games Game Boy, usually games with just the controls and the 2 action buttons, a few arcade games and things like that. Overall, I highly recommend this controller. It functions great, performs perfect. It's a great substitution for the original NES controller that came with the system. You can play this wirelessly, you don't have that short cord to worry about. So the 8BitDo N30 2.4G controller, highly recommended. Go find it on Amazon right now if you're looking for a second controller for your NES Classic system. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.